What's going on, guys? Phil Birch here again from Unfun Stuff, coming back to you with another episode of How to Get Away with Meta. Now, this time, right before the Orlando Regional, we're going to be talking about Eraserhead. One of the characters that I think is definitely due to start making some pretty big showings in the competitive scene. We've already seen Corey Aguilar show up and win the Columbus Regional with it, so it's only a matter of time before I think this character makes a much bigger splash than what has been happening. Then again, that being said, this character is also one of the most mentally taxing characters to have to play for a 8 to 9 round event, plus top cuts the following day. Eraserhead is an incredibly difficult character to play just because your offense is basically completely determinant on speed. You don't really have any big damaging moves. So once you start playing against characters who either block efficiently and very well, or you play against like fat characters, like 35 health characters or 30 health characters, the five hand sizes of the game tends to get a little bit more difficult as well. I will say the five hand size and six hand size characters tend to be less of an issue, mostly because Eraserhead gets to turn them off, right? Playing a race to get to stop your opponent's character from getting to do anything is honestly, pretty strong, right? Like, it's very good into a handful of meta characters. Eraserhead is strong, strong, strong into Asui. That's why you see so many Asuis with like a Kamui Woods in their side deck because they need an option to have to be able to swap out of, right? Eraserhead isn't particularly great into Kamui. Kamui's not particularly great into Eraserhead. They play kind of like a zero sum game where the erasers get to be used more for blocking, just because Kamui's face doesn't necessarily warrant being turned off. The card's also good into into several like other decks, right? I mean, you can stop All Might from getting to draw cards. You can stop him from pumping his stats. You can stop All Might 2 from getting huge damage off, right? And you play a really solid Void package that can deal with throws particularly well. So All Might 2 doesn't necessarily do particularly much into the deck either. You make Tokiavi's kill turn just a little bit harder by stopping him from getting that Dark Shadow instantly or getting multiple copies of Dark Shadow. And I'm pretty confident that Mineta 2 isn't a character into you at all. Like, your offense gets to be offense because you just turn him off when you need him to be off. And then his B build doesn't really exist because your game plan is really to outbuild anyway. And you could always erase to shut that down if you need it. Now, like I said, the most sketchy part of the entire deck is the attack lineup, right? Even if we can see Corey's deck right here, his attack lineup isn't anything particularly innovative or fancy for the character, right? This is kind of how Eraser has been playing since Crimson Rampage has come out. We've seen some success with it in various degrees. Never top 16ing at this point with this deck in a regional manner, but the character itself is very strong. I guess that might not be true. I don't remember what top cutted in Las Vegas. He might have top cutted this Las Vegas. But yeah, the deck is great. It's a super consistent deck. It's just a very taxing deck mentally because the playstyle does tend to be grindy. The kick package is incredibly fun. You get to play cards like Reciprocal Extend into Rebound Sidekick to give you a 5 mid 6 flash option. The rebound sidekicks are almost completely unblockable. If they aren't unblockable, then your acceleration kicks get juiced up at the end of a string. It also provides you a little bit of a damage reduction or a damage buff on any of your moves if you need it to be one. So it's a really fun deck that gets kind of lost in the shuffle, I'd say, of the big picture meta, just because it's not one of those flashy aggro decks and it doesn't play the most fun looking defense. It's not blowing up its whole staging area. It's not readying all of its cards. But what it is doing is getting value out of all of its cards. A lot of its abilities, like manly passionate guy, to build in its blocks, or like confuse to get rid of your opponent's like abilities that can actually hurt you. Stuff like that. They're just good value cards. The one problem with the deck, though, is it doesn't actually lend itself to getting out of deadlock very well. So typically, if you do see the deck into a deadlock situation, it's going to be very into deadlock. It's going to be slammed at 17, 18, 19, 20 foundations because that is the type of game it has to play at that point because there aren't really anything else it can do in those situations. There's no reason the deck to be at like 11 cards because functionally it's the same as being at 50 anyway. Um, the spam is one of the like not the spam itself, but the zero difficulty foundations. You have one choice on void, so the decks have to play 4 copies of Gotcha so you can have a consistent build. Because as we talked about in previous videos, one of the most important aspects of the early game for most of these decks is to get that consistent 4 to 5 build out. And without a zero difficulty in your deck at all, that becomes increasingly difficult. You never want to have your Eraserhead committed because then you lose your best speed reduction card in general, and you also lose access to those erases that can be so valuable against the aggro decks that you might need to stop on turn 2. But yeah, as you can see here, we've got a 6 actions. The 2+ ultras is great. I think that like it's fantastic. It's everything you're gonna want. But this is like I said, this is like the standard. This is what you should expect when you see an Eraserhead. Will there be deviations from it? Absolutely. I've seen Barrett's list. Barrett's list doesn't look exactly like this. It has some differences, some tweaks, some nuance. But this is like this is how the Void decks play. They play a very long game. They play a controlling game. Kuragiri has to play the exact same way. Kuragiri is playing with mostly the same cards and everything. Like it is how Void 7 hand size works. Whoa, little miss up there. But yeah, like I said, the deck is it's very solid. I don't necessarily know. I know it did beat Andrew, and Andrew admitted that he had a play mistake in top cuts against Corey. But I do believe that the deck should struggle slightly with Force Kind, just because it isn't necessarily something you can count on when they are going to use that commit 4. So you're either sitting in a situation where on turn 2 you have to erase it every single time he plays an attack, which means you don't have a hand, which means you're going to lose anyway, or you're really really banking that you can get that stun 4 out of the way and not lose because your options for committed cards is not great. Um, and those decks do get to play a lot of speed. They get to put a big scary move in front of you every single turn, and you're not necessarily always going to have a way to deal with it if you run out of tapes, if you run out of plus ultras, if you run out of like this, that, and the other, right? Like it isn't necessarily a guarantee that the Eraserhead can survive. I do think in a similar way he struggles with very aggressive decks. Like he's going to struggle with not necessarily very aggressive decks, but like tempered aggression, like repeatable aggression. Like Ochako can play a very nice game into Eraserhead because he has to make the decision on every single card. Does he stop her from picking up a momentum? And if you have to use your response on every single attack, that means that you're losing your hand, which means you're more vulnerable, right? I think that is the biggest weakness of the character and its biggest strength is that your opponent doesn't get to have their effects. But if your opponent rips up an attack turn that looks just absolutely crazy, um, you can't defend and turn them off. Like you get one or the other. So Ochako is going to eventually get to draw that card back, or Fourth Kind is going to eventually get to turn like to commit 4 of your cards. Tokiyami is going to get to play bigger strings or get another Dark Shadow. The reason that I find that the character is good against like Tokiyami and Asui, right, is because you don't have to stop them the whole time. These are the big aggro decks where you just have to respond once or twice, and then they're gunked up, right? Like you're making Asui play on +1 difficulty. That's great. That's great. You don't have to continue to do that. You can just leave it at the +1 difficulty by stopping her for one single attack, and that usually is enough to make her turn a little bit harder, which is why people play like ultra compression weights because the Asuis of the world are afraid to play on +2 progressive difficulty with their cards, right? Like they don't want to go playing cards on like a 6 every time instead of on a 5 every time. They don't want to do that. I do think that yeah, I mean like I love the character. himself, right? He does so many cool, versatile things, and your defensive turns feel good. They feel good for the player, right? They feel rewarding. All of your opponent's moves get -2 speed. On the last attack, you get to like the last like presumed attack your opponent plays. You get to block. You get to break or draw two off of Eraserhead, and you get to pre-set up the turn for your like next offensive onslaught, right? And onslaught in like air quotes because it's like a bunch of 4 damage moves into like a 7 damage move. But yeah, that's life, I guess, right? Um, the best way to play against the character is to kind of punish him, right? Is to like like get good pokes in to tax his hand. If you have a character that can repeatedly attack very safely and aggressively without having to commit too much to the attack turn, it's going to hurt the Eraserhead because you're either going to be getting pokes in, which is fine, you're chipping him down, you're getting him lower and lower and lower, or your Eraserhead's going to have to start using the cards in their hand, which is something that they hold really dear, right? Like Eraserhead's turns are very sculpted. They're very like I'm hoarding these attacks. I'm holding these couple blocks. I'm holding these couple attacks. I don't want to get to the attacks because then I have to start doing this whole process over again, which is good for like the aggressor, right? If you can become the aggressor, or if your defense is so stout that even with the +2 speed on everything, even with the huge board and maybe a 5 or 6 attack turn, if you can defend that and like fight that off, then you're typically in a position where your opponent has used all of their erases are removed from the game because they're trying to kill you, so they used them aggressively, and that lends itself greatly to like success. Then your opponent doesn't have a character really. They don't have the ability to like reduce speed so freely and so easily. So yeah. Conversely, he doesn't really have to do any of those things, right? You can just block forever. I watched Damdo play like an 800-hour game against Garrett Brett. They played one game. Neither of them flinched. They just both looked at each other. And that's something Eraserhead can do as well. That's his quirk, guys. Putting the eyeballs on him, you know? Putting little feelers out. So you could equally just do. You could be the most boring Eraserhead in the history of ever, and you could have that go for you, that go well for you. Are there going to be players who will like take that chicken head on and not flinch and just keep going like Garrett Brett did and just be like, all right, well, neither of us are attacking then, I suppose. Yeah, that'll happen. But there's going to be a lot of newer players, a lot of impatient players, a lot of good players that just want to attack. And that's their play style, so they're going to keep attacking and they're going to keep using resources and they're going to get through too many cards in their deck before they realize that they can't kill you, and then that's when you are in total control. Yeah. So anyway, guys, I think that's a pretty good wrap up, in my opinion, of Eraserhead. I I mean, went over a little bit of his strengths. I mean, he's good against the very aggressive 7-handers of the meta. He's a little bit weaker against the people who can't who play more tempered offense, whose offenses aren't necessarily big long strings, but consistent pokes, very consistent pokes, or just aggressive filtering, or just keep on going, right? Like fourth kind, great at poking, and I think that actually is a decent matchup for fourth kind. I'm not going to say it's heavily favored one way or the other, but I think that's the one that fourth kind should or could win. Um, Ochako, just like a great offense where you're just consistent and you don't have like a weakness of getting your character turned off. I think Toga's great into him because Toga is always going to be getting in for 1 damage, even if it's 1 damage at a time. Eventually, you get to chip them out, and your defense is just as good. Mei Hatsume probably has the late game to deal with the character, right? Like she's going to have a billion cards in hand, and that's one of those situations where if they're both staring at each other and no one's aggressing, then yeah, it's probably going to fucking 900 million minute game one tie. But yeah, that's my video, guys. Hope you enjoy it. This is gonna be right before Orlando, so hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of insight of what you should be doing or what you could be doing against Eraserhead. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification button if you want to see when my videos go live. That way you can keep up with it and you don't have to worry about me posting on Facebook, right? Or posting on Twitter or Discord or this, that, and the other. And always, always, always leave me some comments, guys. I love to hear what your guys' opinion is on the things I say and just like in general, because fuck it, dude. I don't know everything. A lot of this is just spitballing. A lot of this is just me talking it out with myself because I think these things to be true. They don't that doesn't mean they necessarily are. Some of you guys might have a better idea. Some of you guys might have more testing in the situation. But anyway, guys, thanks again. I'll see you guys in Orlando and look forward to making some more videos for you guys.